If I could draw everyone's attention to the stage. So this is where I want to work with my students. Phones off, put them in your bags, because otherwise you're going to miss some interesting points. And we love audience participation, so don't worry, we're not going to go into a sing-along, but we will be asking you to ask questions. So it's important that you listen, because if you don't ask questions, they're all going to be coming from myself, and that could get quite tedious and boring. So please, start to think of the questions that matter to you. Just to help the panel, we'd love to know who is in the audience. So just have a bit of a show of hands so we understand the types of people and jobs that you do, so that hopefully we can tailor the discussions towards those different roles. So we will start with teachers. Do we have any teachers? Excellent. Head teachers? Good. Researchers? Excellent. Local authority representatives? Anyone involved in policy? Anyone involved in funding? Don't be afraid to put your hands up, we won't mob you. Any funders in the audience? Yes, fantastic, right, we'll swarm to you at the end. I'm only joking. Thank you for being brave. Okay, so I will introduce myself first. I'll then introduce very briefly the four different panellists before giving them an opportunity of 2 minutes, and we will keep them to 2 minutes, to sum up what we mean by cognitive health, who they are, and what is their background. I then have a few questions that I will ask the panel, and then we're going to hand over to the audience. So we don't have any sort of deathly silences. That's important where you come in. We've got our wonderful helpers in the orange t-shirts who'll be coming around with the roaming mics and hand those over for you to ask your question. So my name is Andy Davis Smith. I'm a reader in Healthy Childhood at the University of Bradford. I'm also the co-director for the Centre for Applied Educational Research. I had the fortune of joining the University of Bradford, moved across from Leeds in the middle of the pandemic. So while we would argue the world was probably at its worst, I actually got a chance to see Bradford at its best. And some of the work that was ongoing within the opportunity area really helped to put a shining light on the services that the opportunity area have provided and the support the opportunity areas have provided to help everyone do their role in what was a very difficult time. So for myself, I focus on physical health. So while you might think, well, why are you chairing a panel if you're into physical health when this is about cognitive health? The body and the brain are connected. We cannot treat them as two disconnected things, which we have been very guilty, and I use we in the big sense, very guilty of in the past, where we see children's brains arriving in the classroom to learn and then leaving through the door, and sometimes we forget their physical needs. Because what do we do with children when they come in to learn in the classroom? This is the audience interaction. We sit them down. And is sitting down the best way to learn? Have you ever questioned why you do that within your classrooms, or why we do that within our classrooms? Because we know if we engage the physical, we can also engage the mental. Okay, that is the end of my part. To my left, we have Cecile de Cat, who is a professor of linguistics from Leeds University. Professor Amanda Waterman, who is a professor of cognitive development at Leeds University. I have Christian Bunting, who is the Birth to 19 Teaching School Director. And finally, Liam Hill, who is a lecturer in developmental psychology. So each panellist will now have 2 minutes to tell us a little about who they are, what they do, and their view of cognitive health before we really get into those deep questions around how do we start to create effective change. So over to you, Cecile.
Thank you very much. So I'm Cecile de Cat, Professor of Linguistics at Leeds University, and I lead on speech and language in the Centre for Applied Education Research in Bradford. And I'm hoping for my slide to appear on the deck here, the one with the blobs. Anyway, that's a pity, a slide for me. Somebody. So, okay, looks like you're not going to see. So what I wanted to explain is that, so my specialism is looking at individual differences between children in their language outcomes. Here it is, that will help. And so bilanguage outcomes, and looking at monolingual and bilingual children or multilingual children. So bilanguage outcomes, I mean, of course, oracy, which is the foundation of all language. And in oracy, children have to achieve not only the communicative competence in their social circles, but also academic competence, which takes a much longer time to develop. And then also they have to acquire literacy, and in particular, becoming independent readers, not just of any text, but also of academic text, which is one of the major challenges. So I see research-informed practice as focusing on two poles, which are the sunshines on the map there. One is the early identification of children who need particular help, and the other one is on fostering a very rich, supportive environment so that everybody achieves their full potential. So in red, you see some children need to be identified early as having an underlying condition, and they will need specialist help. Many other children just require a rich environment, all benefit from that, but for some of them it's only at school that they will receive the positive language environment that they need to flourish, so that's the blue box. And then in green there you have multilingualism, which starts as a challenge for most children, but can turn out to be a massive asset, with multilingual children outperforming monolinguals in a range of areas. So that's me in a nutshell, and my vision for the language contribution to cognitive health.
Thank you very much. Over to Amanda.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Just to say, it's really fantastic to be here, and thank you very much for coming to this panel. And we do really want you to interact. Oh, is it not on? Oh, okay. I was just saying thank you for coming, and that we do really want you to interact. So please do ask us questions. We're very conscious that we're sort of sat up here on the stage and being introduced as experts. Actually, all of you have expertise. It's just a different kind of expertise. But to introduce myself, I am a professor of cognitive development at the University of Leeds. I have been involved in the Born in Bradford project for about a decade now, and oversee the cognitive, or academic lead for cognitive research in that study. Been involved in the Centre for Applied Education Research since it was first set up, and I'm leading on the cognitive aspect of that. So very similar to what Cecile does, but looking at things like memory. So obviously memory is a really important part of our cognitive architecture, if you like, and children need it very much, obviously, to engage in learning. So the thing I'm particularly interested in is something called working memory, which is our very short-term memory, and it's like our mental notepad. So if you need to do a task and you need to complete the thing in front of you, like some maths or some writing or following a recipe, you need your working memory. It's where you hold on to the information that you need in order to complete the task in front of you. And myself and Mark Miller, who is actually chairing the other panel on the blue stage, who is the head of the Bradford Research School, have just recently written some guidance aimed at teachers, for the teachers in the room, to support children with working memory difficulties in the classroom, and we install in the centre bit, just to plug that. So please do come and talk to us over lunch. We'd love to talk to you about that. Anything else you need to know? So other aspects to do with cognitive health revolve around things like attention. So kids need to pay attention to the thing that they need to pay attention to, and they need to sustain that attention, and sometimes they might need to split that attention between two things. And obviously you'll probably be aware that when children have problems with attention, it can sometimes they might get diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. Another thing is something called inhibition. This is all under the sort of umbrella of cognition. So as well as paying attention to the thing that you need to pay attention to, you need to inhibit or not get distracted by information in the environment that is not pertinent to the thing that you're trying to do. So those are the sorts of things I'm interested in: memory, attention, inhibition, and how they link into learning, and children who have difficulties with those things, how we can help support them and help them flourish in the classroom.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Over to Christian.
Let me see this. No, I'm working. Does this work? Oh, good. Okay, I'm Chris Bunting. I'm director at Bradford Birth to 19. I work at a maintained nursery school in Girlington, St Edmunds. Bradford Birth to 19 does teacher training, and I also, there's an awful lot of work around school improvement and collaborative working between health, education, and the pathology and community sector. I'm on the Bradford Opportunity Area Partnership Board. We're founding part of the Alliance for Life Chances. It's an interesting topic for this. I mean, I'm a teacher by by background, think I've ever heard a teacher say, it's a really fantastically cognitively healthy child that we've got in my classroom in front of me. It's not a phrase that you hear in school at all. And that's to think about what that means practically for people working within the education system. I suspect also within health, you're going to say that child's really cognitively healthy. You'll talk about their happiness, you'll talk about their ability to be able to engage and be curious and to learn. And I think for me, that's what cognitive health is all about. I'm going to challenge Andy a little bit around what we do when we go into schools is to ask children to come in and sit down. Because if you work in a school, it's not an awful, a nursery school, it's not an awful sitting down there. And actually we ask children to sit down more and more the older they get. And there's an awful lot of evidence through some of the work that we're doing with our fantastic 50 Things to Do Before You're 5 initiative, which becomes 50 Things Primary in September, about the rich connectivity between getting off your arse, getting walking around, doing things curiously, looking out at the world, talking to people about your experiences, and learning really, really effectively in primary school, in a nursery school, and all the way through to secondary. So for me, it's about learning and that really important subset of cognitive health, which is about mental well-being as well. Well-adjusted children who can feel happiness and sadness and being connected with their emotions are much more likely to succeed in life as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And I like that we've got a discussion brewing already. So over to Liam, last but not least.
Thanks very much. I had a slide as well. I don't know if it's possible to pop it up. It had some animations on it, but to be honest, just bring it up in full, if that's okay. And I didn't get the memo that I was meant to speak about myself, but I was told I had to present a vision for cognitive health. So this is going to be a little bit different, I think, from, I can introduce myself and talk about myself later if you want me to. But so I was raised in a tradition of believing that one of the main functions of cognition was to guide action. And therefore, one of these actions essentially are the processes through which health and well-being are established. And therefore, when we're looking at this idea of cognitive development, we shouldn't really, and I think it's a theme that has come through already, and we might be better off not thinking of cognition in isolation or in abstraction, because in our everyday lives, our cognitive health is embodied and it's purposeful. It's in our actions that we perform. And therefore, if we think about an embodied perspective of cognition like that, we have to recognize that cognitive development, learning, and cognitive health, which, as you say, Christian said, involves well-being, is really underpinned by our physical health as well, and also our capacity for action, our capacity to move our bodies. I've called it physical literacy there. Some people might call it sensory motor development, or the development of the ability for coordinated action. Really, really important for play, which is the basis for one of our first opportunities for learning, as Christian's emphasised. And we've done a lot of interesting work. I won't ask me, I might tell you some more about all the fantastic work we've done, but we've done a lot to look at these synergies between physical health, the ability to develop basic motor skills and coordination, and how that influences cognitive well-being and learning in the classroom in a number of different ways over the course of the opportunity event. I encourage everyone to get a chance to go through and see a lot of the amazing projects that have been carried out in the course of the opportunity area. But in terms of a vision from that perspective, for me, I think it is about recognizing that we can't really have cognitive health unless we consider the foundation and the basis, and that cognitive health is integrated with lots of other aspects of our physical health. And that probably means, in terms of going forward, there's two things I would encourage us to focus on more and more. And one is integration of services. So recognizing that physical health and educational attainment and progress really needs to go hand in hand. And we join up these services and other local services as effectively as possible? And again, I think the opportunity area has done a really good job in starting that. And also, can we look at creating more physically active and healthy ways of learning within school, which maybe, we're already doing a lot of those things, but it's about expanding them and rolling them out. So thank you very much.
Excellent, what a fantastic start. So hopefully you've started to plant a few seeds in your head of some questions you might want to ask, but as moderator, I obviously get to start the process. So a few of you have touched already on what do we mean by cognitive health. I'd just like to go back into that conversation so that we've got a clarity, hopefully, within the audience of what we mean by cognitive health in terms of flourishing, but then also in terms of maybe some of the deficits we might want to address or challenges that children face within a traditional classroom. So I'm not going to go down the row in an orderly fashion. Is there anyone who would like to take that question on? Yes, Cecile?
So from the language point of view, so language is really at the foundation of everything, it's at the center of everything. So to be flourishing with language, you need to be at ease with language for social interaction. It's at the center of that. You need to be able to use language well for verbal reasoning. So language is even the foundation of mathematics and everything. And there's also a lot of reasoning in daily life, etc. And language is key to that. And then finally, again, to come back to reading, it's one of the big predictors of life chances, actually. So those three aspects, I would say, are key to flourishing in terms of language as part of cognitive development. And for the challenges, so I think thinking about in the classroom, the biggest challenge for teachers is not so much to see when a kid is struggling. There's been lots of really fantastic research, for instance, by Lydia, who's sitting there, showing that teachers' intuitions are very good at saying this kid is at this level or that level. The challenge is to know if a kid is struggling, why is that? Is that just because their environment hasn't been quite rich enough, or because they haven't had enough exposure to English yet? Or is it because I need to refer them to somebody? And so, particularly in multilingualism, it's difficult at the beginning to know this kid needs specialist help, or this kid just needs more time and more books and more activities and stuff. So that's what I see as a challenge.
So would we say that language is a partnership between the home and the school? And what might some of the challenges schools face in helping children catch up with language?
So I think it's very important for teachers to have, for schools to have a good understanding of the language reality of children outside of the school as well. So I'm part of an international project where we designed an online tool to, it's a questionnaire, but with, that spews out automatically a report that you can use in the schools that tells you what's the baggage that the child comes with when they come to school? What is the reality outside the school? And that's not to say that, there's a concern if the child has little English outside the school, for instance, not at all. Because we know that, a rich environment in the heritage language is itself an excellent scaffold for English. It's just, for teachers to have a good understanding of what is the child's reality outside of school. Are they having to spend all the time supporting others and not being able to benefit much from, rich language experiences, and that do they have the opportunity to be in clubs or not? And I think the role of the school is to kind of contribute to providing the richness that children need.
And what could a school do to, sorry, we've gone off on a tangent, but I love tangents. So, and as a parent myself, I'm really interested. What can a school do to help children then who are maybe struggling with language? So one of the things I do every night, and probably less so now my children are older, is read. Read a bedtime story. Are there kind of any quick tips that we can provide to schools that they can work within school, but also provide out to parents on? Christian's got his hand up, so I'll come to you next, Christian.
So I'll just say two things, because Christian will say all sorts of great things. So the two things I will say is, the first one is reading to children is fantastic. There's some really interesting evidence coming up, and a current study happening in Beckford-Thornton at the moment, a reading intervention where it's just teachers or people reading to children something that's just a bit above their current level, and reading with the right intonation, with encouraging children to think, what have you heard, what do you think, engaging, that is massive. And then the other thing I would say is, just simply, lots of rich activities around, like, clubs and things like that are really good.
Excellent, thank you. Christian, over to you.
So a number of things come to my mind really on this one. First of all, it's quite an interesting question from Andy. What can we tell teachers? There's some absolutely fantastic practice in this room, I might say, although I can't quite see it. But there's tick there, the Nurture Trust. You've got the work that they do. Some practice in oracy teaching and learning, which is as good as I've seen in the country. And we've got some remarkable practice at the Lillycroft and St Edmunds Nursery School Federation there. And there's other wonderful practice in Bradford. One of the things that Bradford does really well is work around teaching and learning in oracy. It is some of the best practice we see here. Bradford has worked in partnership with School 21, with a number of different projects, Robin Alexander, over the last couple of decades, and we do this work really well, but we're asking to look at deficits here. One of the very, very clear things that's coming out of the pandemic is the impact upon this expressive receptive language, our vocabulary development, born out of the poverty experiences that have been a result of lockdown, of enforced isolation. And actually, worryingly, the stuff I see coming out of schools is that families are still not returning to those kind of experiences that perhaps we would have expected them to do. Behind the thinking that goes behind 50 Things to Do Before You're 5 is encouraging children to go out with their families or other people that love and care for them, to go and do rich experiences, have rich experiences, and to talk to each other and talk to their mums and dads, whoever it is, about the things that they see. It's by doing that you develop experiences. I really do think that there is a challenge for this city, though. We were involved in a Department for Education research project which asked us to do a baseline assessment of children's language skills. And what we did across 60 schools in Leeds and Bradford is just to baseline their language skills in reception. And we tasked the schools to take out the 20% of the most needy children who are already likely to be assessed, were in step to be assessed for kind of like some developmental language delay. So you took out those 20% of children, put them through a speech and language therapist assessment tool called the preschool, the KELF assessment tool. And we found that a third of children who were deemed to be within the normal range had a developmental language problem. When you took out the children who had the most significant problems, you still had 30% of them with significant problems. And the results of this language deficit are found by colleagues here. I've got a colleague here from the police service. If you go along to see young people who are involved in PRUS, the Pupil Referral System, or involved in the criminal justice system, you very often find that they've got developmental language problems and often neurodiversity as well. So it is really important to tackle this, and particularly important to tackle this when children are very young. It becomes increasingly difficult to be involved in making a difference with older children.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to Liam. Then I've got one question, and we're coming to the audience. Okay, so 2 or 3 minutes.
I just wanted to, well, first of all, endorse a lot of things, but I got a lot of thoughts from what we discussed there. And one was really about this idea that cognitive health in a school setting is unlikely to flourish in isolation, and this idea that health outside of, or knowledge of the context outside that setting, and opportunities and context outside those settings are really important. So I've mentioned play already, but play really is your first experiential approach to learning. And if you can enjoy play, you can enjoy learning, and that early motivation can be a real catalyst for things. We also know that schools potentially can benefit massively, and health services as well here can benefit massively from more understanding of how those two ecosystems within a school and around it interplay. So we know, for example, that from work with the Born in Bradford cohort following children as they grow up, that their early health in relation to, say, for example, whether they're born prematurely, what what month of the year they're born in, which influences how physically mature they are when they get to school, can have real impacts on their cognitive school readiness, essentially. And if we can share this information, if we can understand the individual strengths, competencies, and areas in which individuals might need support, I think that joined up working is really important to helping cognition flourish in the school environment.
I can see Amanda's looking at me, so I can't say no. Over to you.
Oh, it does work now. Okay, so just 1 minute, because I know Andy wants to move on, but I guess I just want to say from my perspective, some of the things that I'm interested in are sometimes a little bit more hidden. So I think we all know about language, and it is absolutely central to everything that children do. But things like working memory, attention, inhibition, and perhaps less well understood. So I think one of the things I want to do is try and work with teachers and the community in helping to raise awareness of what those things are, why they're important, and how we can support children. So in terms of that.
Sorry, I had to zone out then to get our roaming mics ready. So, we're going to hand over to the audience to ask their questions. If you'd like to put your hands up, the lady in the blue and white dress, you were first. So, mic's just coming to you. There we go. That's it. Where you are now, stop. No, come on. Over there. If you could introduce yourself, where are you from?
Hi, yeah, my name's Rhiannon. I'm here today in capacity of co-production coordinator for West Yorkshire Ultimate PhD Deep Dive. So coming from an Ultimate PhD perspective, I was thinking about children that aren't developing language and may never develop language, and if they do, it might not be their first choice of communication. At what point are kind of professionals recognising that is a possibility, and then how are they focusing on the development of other types of communication and putting emphasis on that? Because I guess there must be a point where if you're kind of waiting for so long for a child to start using language, that time could effectively be wasted by not encouraging them to go down another path of communication. Does that make sense?
Before we answer, could you just tell us, you mentioned other forms of communication, so everyone's on the same page. What do we mean by other forms of communication?
All of the forms, I guess, Makaton, drawing, object references,
Sorry.
social stories, pictorial stuff.
Excellent, thank you. Is there anyone who would like to take that question? Cecile?
I think if it's language, it's better. So I think your question, there's several aspects to your question. One of them is from what point is a child not able to flourish in mainstream education, because there are certain language skills that are necessary for a child to be able to progress. So I guess it will depend partly, is that child that you're thinking of, thinking about individuals, able to read independently, for instance? Are they able to develop literacy? Is it just something that is oral? So there's a lot of research that is happening now looking at pragmatic abilities, which is the social aspect of language use. And something that needs to happen in the coming years, and is starting to happen, is to work with the community. So, for instance, people with autism or various conditions that affect the way some do not function with language, for instance, of better assessing what their abilities are and how to let them to flourish. So, an area that is very promising is dynamic assessment, where you look not just at what the child's, you could say, static performance is, but you look at, with some scaffolds, what are they able to achieve? And that tells you something about what that child learning potential is, and so with specialized intervention, what they might be able to achieve. So 3 things. So, is it special education that they require? And if not, how can you assess the potential for that child? And is the school able to provide the support that they will need so they could achieve what they... But yeah, it's extremely complex.
I can see a deeper conversation might be needed here, so I'm going to apologise to Cecile because I'm going to offer her up afterwards. So as we finish this debate, as Cecile makes her way out past the curtain, you can carry on, so please go find
There's a stall there with some of my colleagues who learn psychology, education and linguistics are also there, so I'm sure together we can answer your question better.
Okay, Christian, you had your hand up. They're all fighting me now. Christian, you're next.
Yeah, okay. The question was, is enough being done to embrace other forms of communication and to work with neurodiverse children? The answer to that question is I don't think enough is being done by a country mile. One of the things which are communities in the actual local areas of the Alliance for Life Chances, these are the communities, school communities combined service communities as well, stakeholders in Keighley Central, Manningham, Girlington and Homewood are telling us is that the services and the identification of children with autism is weak and it's actually really significantly impacting around children's life chances. So very bluntly, I don't think enough is being done about this. And this combined service, connected service system is not working for children yet because the connections aren't there. So very practically, you've got health identifying some of these needs, and you've got education at the same time identifying some of these needs. Now, because of the work that's being done through CARE with the Early Identification of Autism project, we've got an opportunity to make a difference around this with a connected data system. So you've got people talking to each other and systems talking to each other so that we can intervene and provide support for families and young people at a much earlier stage. Keep going back, it's an early years identification that's needed. The earlier you identify, the more chance you're going to have and make a difference. I would say, what kind of practice is there in school around telecommunication within the special schools sector? It's really well developed. There are many schools, particularly within nursery and reception, who will be using supportive signing right the way through the school day to enable communication with children with additional language needs.
Okay, thank you, Christian. I'm actually going to go back out to the audience now for the next question, otherwise we could get stuck on it for a while. The gentleman with, I'm going to say, a grey jacket, I do apologise if my colours are off. Mostly brown, there we go. I told you my colours are normally off.
Yes, I'm Paul Golding, I'm a local authority councillor. I was just going to talk about the inequalities that I'm concerned with. Well, just an example, one of my grandchildren is being brought up bilingual. She's in a house where she's read a book every night with all the actions, as it were. They've got a piano, with a violin, and a saxophone, etc. And I appreciate that this is not the environment that most children are going to experience before they get to 5. And looking around the environment, a lot of the inequalities are going to be almost baked into the child before they get near to education. And if we're going to deal with those inequalities, those need tackling surely at that stage before they get near new professional educators. And just as a by the way, this is the reason I was born in August, the reason I never got to join the Arsenal football team.
Very likely.
You might not be good enough as well.
Yeah. Leeds or Bradford, however, you could have walked straight into the first team, apparently. So, addressing inequalities before the age of 5 and the importance of that. And a theme I picked up on earlier is a lot of pressure is placed on schools to remedy the issues of society. And actually, how do we not only support schools, but support society to address some of these inequalities? Who would? Christian, off you go.
You're absolutely on the button there with that comment around that. You know, it is around what would be called the home learning environment, and there is a big responsibility around the family, around society, and around those people who live with children and care for them. It's about all our jobs within society to help children grow up well-adjusted and happy and positive. 50 things to do before you're 5, and I'll bang the drum on there. Works from children from birth. It's an offer for parents and families, starting with early nurturing behaviour for children who are 1, 2 and 3 months old, all the way through to the age of 5, all the way through to the age of 11 from September when we launch that offer. Those things are really very important, and there is, to a large extent, not much more now that we can ask of our schools, because they're doing every single thing they can to do the very best to give children the best educational outcomes. But you're absolutely right. They can't give children the language and the richness of experiences in the time that they have with them. Equally around the physical health, I might say, as brilliant as schools may be around PE, as wonderful as they may be in primary with their 2 hours a week, that's not going to make a difference to children's health outcomes, to their physical abilities. And so that's a responsibility of us all. And it's a responsibility of how society is set up to create activities. There's still there's increasingly worrying and diverting tendency for children and adults for that matter to spend more time looking at their phones and screens than they do talking to each other.
Christian, can I interject here? Because whose responsibility is it? And we say it's the home environment, but actually, how do we start to change the home environment and address inequality? Which organisation takes responsibility for that? When a child arrives at school, the school becomes the central focus. But prior to that point, there is no requirement for a child to interact with any services within a city. So how do we start to address that as a problem? Because we've talked about this for the last 15 years, well, and more so, and it's not changing. It's getting worse.
And that's a very, very complicated answer, because what schools do, what we do through 50 things, through the work that we try to do across the sector, is many and complex relationships and partnerships with community groups, with parent groups, with toddler groups, with schools, with the private voluntary independent sector, with church groups, with the madrasa, with all sorts of other organisations which I can't even, I've not been adequately able to list there. The museums and gallery service, they're all people who can be part of that solution, but there is no one wraparound. There's no statutory requirement for children families to take up the offer of early education at 2, despite encouragement. And a lot of those, the impacts and the capacity for those organisations to make a difference has been significantly knocked back really by the pandemic. So there is a road that we need to go to travel down to make that progress. I would say I'm incredibly positive about Bradford. There is some, stunning practice in the room here of people who do fantastic work in this space. Life-changing work in this space.
Thank you. And I think one of the things I would like to make sure everyone feels included, I've been sat in audiences many times where I've thought, we're doing something about this already. Actually, if I could only just say something about this, actually, we could probably even help the panel understand what we're doing already. So if you are sat in the audience and you want to share some of the work that you are, there we go, right. So the lady who's just, 2 of them have just put their hands up. Have we got the roaming mic? What have we got? Excellent. Come on, tell us about some of the good work that's going on within the area.
Hi there, so I'm Jo Med, and actually I missed the policy thing, I just wasn't concentrating. So I'm actually from NHS England and sit in the National System Transformation team. But I'm also a trustee of a local charity in Bradford, which is BD4 Community Trust, BD4 Family, and we do James for because I've been part of Better Start over these last several years, and just really just the impact, the difference we've seen in families who've had that early intervention has been huge. It just makes all the difference when somebody engages with you. So we're a voluntary sector organisation who've just really kind of engaged with the local community in BD4 and really brought together all the different offers from Better Start Bradford, and that early language, the addressing mental health, all of those things, and working together with services. And we've got that capacity in Bradford, we know how to do it. It's just having the context. And I'm going to hand over to Rebecca in a minute. Just one last thing I wanted to pick up on that's been said already, and I think this drove me into a national policy on, is what Christian was just saying about services being weak at the moment. And I think we've got all that we need, but that local infrastructure, I think, is something that is, we just haven't got enough of the implementation infrastructure in Bradford. It's what I've heard back from others recently and what I experienced as a health history in Bradford myself for many years.
So before you hand over, because I like connecting people up, our councillor obviously was very brave about to stand up and ask the question. What's your ask of the councillor?
I think to influence the next contract that's about to be made for
Better Start Bradford.
For early years.
Early years.
Well, for our 0 to 19 service is going to, the strategic commissioning manager is about to be appointed.
Yeah.
Let's get our voices heard as community groups and as educators and people who are passionate about children and young people and babies and families. Let's get our voices heard into that contract. And just from a national point of view as well, we've had the Full Stop Take came out, that focus on setting up really good neighbourhood groups, integrating everybody at that level. The opportunity is here, so let's seize it.
And worse, not lose it.
Yeah,
which will be devastating. So again, another conversation that could maybe happen after the panel to help address the early childhood years. Over to yourself.
As much as I like to talk a lot, I'm not really great at public speaking. But yeah, I'm Rebecca Heald, Language Development Programmes Manager for BHT Early Education and Training. We obviously have a focus on the early years. Very aware that your children that arrive to you at 5 have not just been born. They've had many things happen to them prior to that, and lots of them not the opportunities that we would have hoped. But at BHT we are currently commissioned by Better Start Bradford to deliver their language and communication programme. So the one that was devised by BHT is the Talking Together programme. This has already been evaluated through some of the research fellows up at the Innovation Hub, and we've got the Otter project out there for anybody to read on that. But it covers, as a programme that is delivered in the home to families, every one of the areas that each of the doctors, professors all spoke about earlier on, in that, we're looking at giving skills to parents, providing those skills to parents, that knowledge base around the development of communication and language, why that is so important for their children prior to them reaching school, how important they are, what their role is, but mitigating that with all the things that they have going on as a family as well at the same time. So, it's not just looking at, what experiences they have. We can have all these wonderful programs, but unless we're going to understand where these families are coming from and what they've got going on, we're going to find it very difficult to implement those as programs. But again, fantastic that we've got the Better Start Bradford programme now. We've been able to see that this is an intervention that does work. We want more of that. It should not just be restricted to a small area of Bradford, especially when we know that there is so much need across the rest of the district.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you a question. 3 of the main challenges that you face in the delivery of that programme, and then how can we help you supercharge it?
Money would be the supercharge to enable us to employ more staff to be able to deliver that. 3 of the challenges in delivering it around meeting the needs of the family, so coming across, and it being that the practitioner that delivers that does not only have to have the knowledge around speech and language development, play skills, the importance of play, cognitive development, come from that kind of background, but they also have to understand what's actually happening with the family, why the parent maybe doesn't read that book every night. How fantastic would that be if a parent had access to books? And you can say, yeah, there's a local library, but how local is that library when you've got very small children and not the money to get on a bus to get down into town because all the other libraries around you have closed? It's really, it would be fantastic if they would be able to do that. The parent themselves have not had good experiences through education or are not able to read themselves. We just have to look at the whole of the situation going on with that child and not just say, we can do it. It would be really nice if they read a book every night and the language development would be improved.
Great, thank you. And I'd say your public speaking was really, really good. So give yourself a pat on the back. I'm actually going to come back to the panel because I'm aware that we focus very much on early childhood and we also need to talk about the primary years and into secondary as well. So I'd like to refocus the conversation slightly. Sorry if we've missed a question from you. To look at cognitive health within primary and secondary settings. So Amanda, since this is your area, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, well, just to echo what's been said, early years is absolutely crucial for trying to intervene there. But I think there are two things I would say about that. One is that the reality is, we know there will be a lot of children coming through to school that haven't had that for all the wonderful programs that are out there. So we also need to provide the support and the guidance and work with the teachers in the schools to give them the tools to help the children that come through that maybe haven't had those interventions or that support early on. And the second thing to say from a cognitive point of view, I mean, language, you could say is part of cognition, but if we put language to one side, there are some things around cognition that don't necessarily materialise in those very early years. So there are some things that might not show up, if you like, in those very early years. So there are some things we might start to see a little bit more in primary school when they're having to do more focused activities, when they're having to do things where they do have to sit and concentrate for longer periods of time. So whilst early years, yes, absolutely we need to pour lots into that, and it's not neglected. There are some things that we still, that's why the primary school years are so important, partly because so many children haven't had that support, and partly just because there are some things that we might not be able to identify in the early years. So that's...
Thank you. I'm going to come to Liam, but this is a bit of a weighted question, might be right.
Thank you.
So, in terms of addressing cognition, Liam is doing a project around physically active learning and actually looking at how do we address attention or improve attention through being physically active. Because what we do see, and you're right, Christian, in your points that you made earlier, around the early years is very active, but when we hit key stage 1, there is a very rapid transition from play-based learning to seated formalised learning. And actually what we're starting to see through the research, which I'm going to pass over to Liam to talk about, is the benefits of maintaining play-based learning throughout primary, and that doesn't mean doing play-based learning all the time, but also actually through into secondary as well. So Liam, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about physically active learning, being physical, cognition, cognitive health, etc.
Yeah, so I think physical activity is interesting in that sense because there is, for example, we know of alternative forms of learning that are potentially more effective for disadvantaged learners. So we know, for example, we've talked about specialised programmes to help with language and what have you, but taking a more tailored approach, we might, in certain groups, see more physically active and engaging, potentially engaging, essentially, activities being more effective at communicating those learning goals that we want to and achieving those learning goals with children. And as you say, there are lots of ways in which, and I think it is a significant challenge in terms of teacher training and initial teacher training to kind of flip a mindset, particularly in those later stages of education. I mean, there will always be limits on what's practical. I mean, we're certainly finding that in the Age of Wonder, where we're now starting to work in secondary schools versus primary schools. They kind of just logistically what's feasible in a secondary school is a different planet from what we've been used to working on in primary school over the last 4 or 5 years with Born in Bradford, and we're learning a lot right now about kind of some of those challenges. But also if we take cognitive health from a mental health and well-being perspective, there are really significant benefits well established now of physical activity in terms of mental health and managing stress, anxiety and depression and these sorts of things, which again, go back to the Born in Bradford cohort, we're now getting to a stage with the children in that cohort where we're seeing the emergence of those issues in some of the children in our cohort. How do we support them? Doing what we call trials within cohorts, where we look at maybe variability and learning a lot from, as Christian said, the excellent practice that's going on in many areas of our education system by comparing what are the outcomes and the different outcomes for children who maybe the attitude or the policy in this school is different from that school, and how does that influence things? But very much, physical activity is a tool that we can use effectively to support learning, and there's certainly scope probably to use it in a wider range of settings within the curriculum.
Great, thank you. Good answer.
So I think someone mentioned implementation over there. Really important. So we can do a lot of things around providing guidance, providing support, materials, resources for schools and teachers. But something that tends to be forgotten sometimes is thinking about how we can actually implement that and sustain the implementation of that. So I would say that another challenge that we face as teachers, as schools, as academics, is carefully thinking about the implementation side of anything. Because it's slightly, well, it's not always easy, but it can sometimes be easy to come up with, oh, you need to do this, and this is a really great thing that you need to do. And then you'll hear that from Cecile about language, and me about memory, and Liam about physical activity, and then all the other people here with all their things that they're really passionate about and that are really important. But A, you can't do all of those and then teach the curriculum on top of that in your spare time. And B, implementation and thinking about how to implement it, how to get senior leadership brought in, etc. All these really, really key things that we must talk about in the context of this support that we're trying to provide.
Okay, very quickly, Cecile, and then we have got 4 minutes left, so we need to round off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that sometimes you might have an intervention or a support program that is targeted at a specific group, like for instance the multilingual children, but it's been proven that all children across the school benefit from these programs. So thinking about the point Amanda was raising here, if in the school that there is, in each school there should be an EL specialist who then trains all the teachers to be language aware, and for this intervention in a sense of support to be present at every single opportunity in the school. So for everyone to be involved, I think that's the key also for successfully reaching the children they need it.
Okay, thank you. So we have 4 minutes left before we have to finish. I was going to ask this question to the panel, but one of the things I love about Bradford is the research is driven by the needs of practice. So my question to the audience is, and we're going to have to be very quick, looking at the next 5 years, what are going to be the big research and practice questions that you would like our help with to improve cognitive health of the children and teachers within Bradford? Okay, I'm going to come over here. We might need about 2 microphones on the go if we can, because we've got literally 20 seconds per person. Let's see what you can share with us. Get your notepads out, researchers. These are your grants for the next 5 years.
So I'm Sarah Exall, I'm consultant in public health. A lot of our work is focused on trauma and adversity, and obviously if you're dealing with non-processed trauma, you can't have a good working memory, you can't focus on your work, and you can't engage properly in lessons. So my question would be, how can schools embed a trauma-informed approach within the normal routine practice, and what works best in terms of implementation for trauma-informed schools?
Okay, thank you. So trauma-informed approach, excellent. Next time, we've got somebody over here. Oh, no. Was there someone with a hand up down here? Great, thank you. And we've got 2 over here.
Thank you. Mine was very similar. It was about emotional and mental health of children. Language key, cognition key, and I know everything is linked, but you cannot process thinking and learning if your emotional responses up here. We've got lots and lots and lots of children who cannot cope with their emotions, so shut down to all aspects of learning. We've got parents who have emotional and mental health needs, which then impacts on their children. We've got poverty on top of that, which impacts on obesity. It's cheaper to buy a takeaway than it is to buy fresh fruit. So it's the social and mental health issues for families and children, I think, that is the crux. So, and particularly trauma and adverse experiences, because like you referenced, Amanda, ADHD, children who've experienced early trauma have very similar symptoms to
3,
ADHD.
2, 1. Sorry, on to the next person. Where was the hand? We've got 2 hands over here. Sorry to cut you off. I didn't want to be rude. We've got 1 in the middle there, just near the back. Hands up high so we can see.
Hi, I'm Meg. I'm from the University of Bradford, and I'm hoping it's a research question that I can look into one day. But in a nod to Christian, we sort of thinking about how can we support children who are not accessing mainstream education in developing their cognitive health. So I'm thinking about children in the criminal justice system where 70 to 80% of them have speech, language and communication difficulties. How do we support them as a YJS? How do we support them in PRUs? How do we support them as a social care service in developing these skills and then not accessing school?
Great, thank you very much, Megan. Last question, you've literally got 10 seconds. Quickly run the microphone to it. Excellent.
Thank you. I'm Claire. I work on the museums and galleries, and we've had a very small project running with 50 things called Walk, Talk, Discover and Draw. And in the next 5 years, we'd really like to look at links of creativity and culture and the wider environment and how they can impact on making it better for children of our district.
Fantastic, thank you very much. We've got 10 seconds, so I'm going to sum up and say we've had a fantastic discussion. Thank you for your audience participation. It's been extremely useful. For me, the consistent theme through all the questions has been about creating a connected city with connected services. The journey has started with the Bradford Opportunity Area and will continue with Alliance for Life Chances. The only way we can connect people together is by starting conversations. So if you're sat there thinking, I really liked what that person said, or actually I want to ask them more, that's how we create connection. So please use this to start your conversations. Go talk to the people you've heard speaking, and thank you to the members of the audience. I'd like to give a big round of applause for our 4 panellists, but also the audience we go to as well. And it's not just asking fantastic questions, but sharing some of the great work that's already going on within Bradford. Looking forward to the next session. If you would like to stay on the orange stage, which is this one, we have digital and data, which will be hosted by Dan Burks. If you'd like to move to the blue stage, that is looking at improving community engagement, looked after by Catherine Loftus. Thank you very much.